So the passage from the lectionary this week and the chapter from Doug John Hall's book that we're studying between Christmas and Lent just fit together so well. I was kind of flabbergasted and felt like it was a bit of a freebie this week when I looked it up and went, oh, fantastic. Jeremiah is rallying the troops. He's in sort of this stage of Israel's history where they've been scattered. 10 of the 12 tribes of Israel have been lost. Many people of those tribes have assimilated into the surrounding culture. They've been exiled. They're gone. And Jeremiah is saying, okay, now the real work can begin. Now that we are a fragment of our former greatness, now we can truly be great. That is what Hall's talking about this week. So we're on to our first chapter. I talked about the book and introduced it last week. We're on to our first chapter, and it is called Christianity is Not a Culture Religion. So he spends a good deal of the chapter talking about how our temptation and our history is both pushing us to mix culture and religion together. Our history is, for the last 1,500 years, we've been it in the West. If you are European or live in a country like Canada, the US, Australia, that has or any of the Latin countries as well, that has their history in Europe, it's just a given that you're Christian. And so for us to be shrinking, it's confusing. And you know, in Canada, we're really only 100 years away, or 150 years away, depending on what part of the country you're from, of, you know, when we started planning a city, we put churches in, and not just one denomination. We put a couple of churches in these towns where we thought people were going to live. You know, we've got this very triumphal history of Christianity and culture. But even just when we look at the Great Commission and this wonderful news that is the gospel, we've got this sense that yes, we are committed. We have to merge culture and history together. And Hall is saying that's probably not healthy. Tricky, right? And to do that, he doubles down on the discomfort and says Christianity is not actually a religion. He starts out by saying that if you look at the Old Testament, Israel is sort of constantly at war with itself. There's the established temple system, the organized part of it, and then there's the prophetic tradition that's very critical of the whole thing and constantly sort of railing. And if you read the Old Testament, there's two histories in the Old Testament. It sort of skips around from book to book, but there's two histories that are sort of intertwined with different perspectives in the Old Testament. One's the established religion, one's the prophetic tradition. So he's saying that this tension between religion and something else goes back to our very beginning. He says that Jesus actually was at war with religion. His words were that Jesus is trying to rid us of the burden of religion. And if you look at the story of Jesus, it was that friction between religion and this other thing that led to his death. Jesus and his friends were not a religion, but they very much threatened the established religion, and that's what led to the cross. Karl Barth, who, you know, you may or may not know about Barth. He's an everyday name, but he's also not. But he said religion is grasping. Religion is saying, God, come here, I'm grabbing you and pulling you to me. But this other thing is about receiving, about sort of being more passive, letting the Spirit come to us. And Dietrich Bonhoeffer, a towering figure in our faith, he used the story of Babel and the story of Pentecost. The two are usually bookends to the other. So the story of Babel, very early in the Old Testament, and early in our Judeo-Christian history, people built this tower to try and get closer to God. They were grasping at God. And as a result, they got scattered, and the languages were confused, and different cultures were created, and there was division. Pentecost is usually seen as the counter to that. That's when we were united by the Spirit. And if you look at the story of Pentecost, they weren't grasping. Jesus had gone, and all the people around him were going, what do we do now? And they were literally just sitting in a room, probably feeling sorry for themselves, when the Holy Spirit came and found them and pulled them to action. Grasping versus receiving. That's sort of what we're talking about here. He also says something I think is tremendously interesting. We all know the very strong-willed atheists in the world right now. Atheism's been around forever, but there's this thing that we're generally calling new atheism that's almost an evangelical atheism. And these are people that not only do they not believe in something divine, but they have very, very big problems with organized religion. Sort of the mantra is that nothing good can come of organized religion, and if you look at the history, only bad has come from it. And as Christians, I think we find this really threatening, especially because a lot of it's leveled at us. And, in Canada, the example is residential schools. The new atheists would say that only happened because organized religion let it happen. I would argue it's more nuanced than that, and people are going to be people anyway, but that's sort of what they're saying, is these atrocities and power struggles can happen because organized religion lets it. So what he's saying is that new atheists have this truth that actually Christians should know better than the new atheists do. And the reason being is because our history, Old Testament, struggle between the prophetic and the priestly. The gospel story of the institution being threatened by this little band of nobodies, really, to the point where they put one of them to death. The early church in the letters, being persecuted by the Romans and the other religions around. We know that friction. Well, we don't, because we're 1,500 years after it. But we know that should know that friction far better than anybody else. But we've forgotten it. And he's saying that we shouldn't. So like I said, this is a bit of an uncomfortable thought for a lot of you. I want to encourage you to play with it, though. I've really struggled with this myself as someone who has been very critical. I grew up in the church, and then I became very critical of it. I don't think I ever quite became one of these new atheist type people, but I was extremely critical of the church. And then I went, hey, there's something important here. I want to make sure that light doesn't go out. That's why I'm in ministry. I'm not particularly tied to the old way or any way. I've seen the good stuff, and I want to make sure it doesn't go out. And so I've never really lost that edge, and I've never really had the allegiance to the past that a lot of people do. And that's always had me struggling. Like, I've always had an inkling of what Hall's talking about, but I've never quite been able to put it into words or say it confidently, because I can't quite wrap my head around it. And I'm saying this to sort of say, if you're struggling to wrap your head around it, that's fine. That is completely fine. I think all that he's asking us to do is to think about it. So if we're not a religion, what the heck are we? And he's saying that the traditional academic split, now I got to admit I've never seen this, but I like it, is culture religion versus prophetic faith. He's saying that Christianity is destined to be critical of culture. If you think about it, we were in the early days this group of ragtag people on the margins of society, right? We were already out, and we were already very much recognizing the unfairness of the world around us and the imbalance. And he's saying that we sort of belong there. We sort of belong being this group of people that is saying, hey, let's rethink this and work towards something better. That's being prophetic. The prophets were the ones that said, hey, this is wrong and you need to stop. Otherwise, this is going to happen. Saying that's sort of where our basis should be, rather than defending the existing culture. Because if we defend the existing culture, the culture might be great. I think we've got a really healthy culture in Canada. I'm really proud to be Canadian. But if we blindly defend it, the blind spots are going to grow, right? I think the worry for a lot of people is that then you sort of jump on the bandwagon for flavor of the month. Like anything that comes along, we've got to be in favor of. And I would draw the line, and Hall draws the line, saying that no. We're not one side or the other of the spectrum. We're thinkers, we're reflectors, we're prayers. We are people of theological reflection. This is why I think coffee hour is really important, and it's the thing that I miss most. I miss worship, I do, but I really miss coffee hour, because to me that's where you get to share your ideas. And that's where community forms, and you've just sort of been thinking about something in the morning and reflecting and praying and communing with God and with each other, and then you go downstairs and you talk about it. And I think that's really important. Or if you really want to roll up your sleeves, then you get into a study group. That's where theological reflection happens. That's where we go, okay, we don't like this, we think we should go here, but this is uncomfortable too. Like that's where we sort of, as a group, we feel our way through. We're led by the Spirit through. And he's saying that's where we should be. Not defending the culture, but not flavor of the month either. We're prophets. The problem with being a prophet, and I think this is where we have the hardest time with it, because I think a lot of us probably do see ourselves as prophets, is that you will not be popular. If you're the person that's saying, hey, this thing that we have all agreed on that we like is problematic, you're not going to be popular. Prophets have been not dealt with well in history, and not generally listened to, and not generally liked. And he's saying that's where we're called to be. We will not be popular. And this is where there's something that really requires a lot of reflection on our behalf, because our traditional paradigm for the last 1,500 years, and especially if you're Canadian, American, maybe Australian, anyone sort of living in a colonial culture that's been, frankly full of white people, we've had this triumphalistic, growth-based model. And then in the last 50 years, we've been losing that. It's really hard, is all I'm saying. It's really hard to say, maybe we don't need growth, because we want to see our community succeed. We don't want to lose it. We think this is important. We want it to at least be stable, if not grow. And Hall's saying maybe growth isn't actually the right thing, because we're kind of destined to be unpopular. He actually uses this statistic. He says, in pre-Constantinian Rome, so Constantine and after was when Christianity became the state religion of Rome, or the main religion of Rome. I forget which one actually made it official, but I've said for the last 1,500 years, because up until about 400 something, it was not the state religion of Rome. It was this other thing. So for the last before Constantine in Rome, Christians were at most 10% of the population. And he's sort of saying that's probably the ceiling. That's probably as much as we're ever going to have if we're doing it right. But we're looking at it and going, okay, our history is that on paper, the last 1,500 years, we've been 100% Christian. And, realistically, it's probably more 75 or 80%. But, he's saying healthy is more like 10. And if you look at 10% of 35 million people, that's probably about as many Christians as we actually have. Hall uses this phrase that we're no longer culturally established, but we're not culturally disestablished either. So we're no longer established, but we're no longer disestablished either. And he's saying that we probably need to be disestablished from the culture. He's saying right now the church is so confused right now and so troubled because we're normalizing our relationship with culture. I'm going to read this quote from the book that I thought was really powerful, and that's going to sort of end things. In place of the power-seeking and power-keeping church of the long Christendom centuries, we are returning to the biblical situation of the little flock, which, because it is relatively little, and because it does not see its destiny as becoming big, is able in the midst of a highly diverse global situation to be salt, yeast, and light concretely, to be a community of peacemaking, of justice seeking, and of stewardship of the good creation. Undoubtedly, this is going to make a few of you uncomfortable. And many people actually even see this kind of talk as anti-Christian, against, our command to the Great Commission. Sorry, disappeared out of my head. Against the Great Commission, and defeatist, really. Paul's saying maybe we need to rethink that. And I'd really like to know what you think. If you feel comfortable doing so, I encourage you to leave a comment on the blog below. Or if you really want and you have something a little longer, you can send it to me. You can email it to me, and I'll enter it as a blog post. I'll copy and paste it and introduce it and say this is another perspective. But I'd really encourage you to spend some time thinking about that, about how this whole idea of not being a culture religion or a religion at all really makes you feel, and then let the rest of us know. Let's do some theological reflection together, just like Paul says we should. Amen.